2:14 p.m. Central Standard Time, September 22nd, 2023. Right? What does it say? My favorite, starting with 268. A Memorial Day, a date most Americans devoted to honoring those who had died in war. Richard Nixon decided to build on his remarkable achievement by reigniting his lifelong war against the press. That day, he issued very strict instructions to all his aides. No one from the White House staff, under any circumstances, is to answer any call or see anybody from the New York Times. With regard to the Washington Post, Ron Ziegler, under no circumstances, is to see anyone from the Washington Post, and no one on the White House staff is to see anybody from the Washington Post or return any calls from them. He even banned the Post from his daughter Tricia's June 1971 White House wedding. But even Nixon could not ignore the powerful dailies for long. Within months, he found himself doing direct battle with these very newspapers in a spectacular struggle over leaked Defense Department documents that came to be called the Pentagon Papers. A rigorously documented 47-volume chronicle of America's 22-year-long involvement in Vietnam, it had been assembled in the late 1960s by order of then-Secretary Robert S. McNamara. In the understatement of his career, McNamara characterized the results as encyclopedic. In fact, it was explosive, filled with evidence of unreported military escalation and unacknowledged presidential dissembling. The report was meant for internal use only, or, as had been speculated since, as a briefing for Robert Kennedy had he lived to run against Nixon in 1968. Eventually, one of the outside experts preparing the document grew so dismayed by its revelations about longtime U.S. missteps and secrecy that he determined to leak it. After secretly making photocopies, Daniel Ellsberg of the Center for International Studies at MIT tried sharing the results with both the Nixon administration and the anti-war senators J. William Fulbright and George S. McGovern. He got no takers. Then Ellsberg offered the material to one-time war correspondent Neil Sheehan of the New York Times, who instantly recognized its enormous news value. The newspaper's legal advisors, however, cautioned against publication of the government-owned report. Times publisher Punch Sulzberger told me years later that his decision to overrule the attorneys marked his proudest and scariest moment at the paper. It was also his bravest. The blockbuster excerpts that began appearing serially on June 13, 1971, showed how each presidential administration since Truman's, including those of Eisenhower, Kennedy, and Johnson, had successively escalated the American commitment in Vietnam from advisory status to all-out war. The documents were particularly harsh on Johnson, revealing that he had expanded U.S. involvement a full year before announcing the buildup to the public. For a while, ruefully acknowledging the Times exclusive, the Washington Post relegated itself to summarizing its rivals' scoops with full credit. Then, responding to a Nixon administration request to restrain the New York paper, a federal court issued an injunction enjoining the Times from further publication. While the Times prepared an appeal, Ellsberg leaked another trove of photocopied pages to Post national editor Ben Bagdikian. After several rounds of frenzied discussions between publisher Katharine Graham, managing editor Ben Bradley, and the newspaper's own lawyers, while reporters struggled to make coherent sense out of the 4,000 pages of material, the Washington Daily began on June 18th to pick up where the New York paper had left off. The Nixon administration took its case for suppression all the way to the Supreme Court. Its zealousness remains something of a mystery, since the Pentagon Papers offered no criticism of Nixon, only of his predecessors. He might more profitably have used their appearance to defend the military stalemate he had inherited when he assumed office. For one, he may well have been thinking about the office of the presidency and not himself. How the hell can a president do anything, he wondered. How can they make a contingency plan if it's going to be taken out of a trunk and be given to a goddamn newspaper? Yet in private conversations with his staff, he seemed to take the matter more personally. Goddamn Post, he cursed in a July 2nd Oval Office meeting, saying that, well, that's the price of the First Amendment. Publisher Katharine Graham's son, the paper's future publisher, he bellowed, was a little shit-ass, and the administration's critics all draft dodgers. Then he pivoted, acknowledging with a non sequitur, the press must think of it in terms of circulation. We understand that they have to print everything. I have to look at it in terms of the life of American men and their glory. Ricocheting yet again from his sense of obligation to his feelings of persecution, he proclaimed, Times reporter Sheehan guilty as hell, admitting, but you prosecute a newspaper man, you're in a difficult position. Nixon concluded his diatribe by comparing Daniel Ellsworth unfavorably even to his lifelong bête-noir, Elger Hiss. I gotta say for Hiss, he never ratted on anybody else. Never. Along with a fellow source, Ellsberg, the man Nixon now took to calling the Jew, now faced a treason charge under Woodrow Wilson's old 1917 Espionage Act, a case later dropped when the courts learned that the administration tried to steal incriminating documents from Ellsberg's psychiatrist. But first, on June 30th, in deciding perhaps the most consequential freedom of the press case in American legal history, following the most intrusive attempt at government censorship since the Civil War, the High Court ruled 6-3 against the government. The Times and Post could resume publication of the Pentagon Papers without further interference or legal exposure. Writing for the majority, 85-year-old Associate Justice Hugo L. Black, destined to die a few months later, offered this opinion, quote, in the First Amendment, the Founding Fathers gave the free press the protection it must have to fulfill its essential role in our democracy. The press was to serve the governed, not the governors. The press was protected so it could bear the secrets of the government and inform the people. Only a free and unrestrained press can effectively expose deception in government. And paramount among the responsibilities of a free press is the duty to prevent any part of the government from deceiving the people and sending them off to distant lands to die of foreign fevers and foreign shot and shell.